All right, welcome back to KP Unpacked. This is my opportunity every week to ask KP Reddy, founder and CEO of KP Reddy Co., and also the founder of Shadow Ventures. Hey, KP, when you posted that on LinkedIn, what were you thinking about? I say that every week as a little bit of tongue in cheek, but this is my opportunity to ask KP, what was the inspiration behind this thing that you posted on LinkedIn? If you're not following KP on LinkedIn, you should be. Just go to KP, the letter K, the letter P, and then Reddy, Reddy. He posts a couple times, 3 times a day about his insights, the things he's heard, the things he's learned, conversations he's had around designing, building, developing, owning, operating in the built environment. And all of his posts are thought provoking and insightful, having to do with the AEC world and beyond. Sometimes investing, sometimes startups. And like I said earlier, sometimes designing or building, as we're going to talk about today, and often owning and operating. So I am joined as always by KP Reddy. Hi, KP.
Hey, what's going on, Jeff?
A lot of podcast recording today,
Yeah.
actually. So if I get quiet at some point, my voice has left the building. We'll see how it goes.
Well, if you're a great podcast host, you're talking less and you're letting your guests talk more.
This is true. And that's my strategy right here.
I'm just telling you.
So get ready, everybody. This is going to be KP Reddy. The post that we selected today, it's funny, we were talking before we hit record, and you posted this. So for a little inside baseball for everybody, KP and I, before we get started recording and all these sessions, like, okay, we look at what he's posted, we look at the engagement, what's hitting, what's not, what are people commenting on, what are they not, and then of course we select a couple of episodes to record. And one of the episodes that KP pointed out before we hit record today was, hey, let's talk about this one. And I'm going to read it to you here in a minute. But as we're recording this on February 21st, 2025, so, if you're listening to this a year from now, dial it back a little bit. You posted this about 24 hours ago, and it's blowing up. I mean, I think that's the technical term for what's happening. It's blowing up.
That's what the kids say.
That's what the kids say. Yeah, those kids. Lots of comments, lots of reactions to this. And this is one of the shortest posts that you've had in a long time. Not that most of your posts are very long, but this is literally 3 sentences long. So I'm going to read it, and then we'll unpack it. We started unpacking it a little bit before I hit record. But I think this is going to be pretty interesting. So here's how it goes. I hear lots of answers to this question, and I have my own ideas. Why do so few GCs self-perform anything? If your answer is risk, please be specific. That's it. That's the whole post. So where did this come from? What conversation? What were you hearing? What were you doing that brought this to mind? And that specific question: why do so few GCs self-perform anything?
Yeah, there were 2 things that came up. One, I've been working on this owners initiative, which there should be some news coming out soon about how we're doing that. But I think late last year I said, hey, I'm just going to spend time with owners and talk to a lot of owners,
right?
Because ultimately they pay all our bills, right? They're paying for this podcast in some way.
Yeah, right? In some roundabout way.
In some roundabout way, right? So we're not spending enough time with these owners. Let's spend more time with these owners. And what I've been hearing from owners is, hey, we hire these general contractors. They don't do anything. Like they're not laying brick, they're not tying rebar, they don't perform anything. And they are there to help us manage risk and manage the project. However, there's like a change order, right? We're paying for all the change orders.
Right.
So are they really managing risk? Like none of these folks are going out of business because they didn't manage risk well. It's more a rationalization. They maybe push down the risk to the subcontractor, which if it was their own self-perform, they can't do that, right? Like they can point to the drywall guys and say, drywall guys screwed this up. Like we're gonna squash them down for you. owner, or it's, or they're passing the change on to the customer, right?
Right.
The owner's paying for it. So I'm like, are they managing risk? I guess that's managing risk, but it also feels like it's passing the buck around, right? It's like, just don't charge me for anything, right?
Well,
So that was one area of thinking. And then, I've got in my mind, like every day I think about this, right? We all think about certain things. I'm a nerd. I think about things, probably less interesting. But it hit me the other day that if AI is going to design buildings, are they designing buildings with the means and methods of humans in mind? Or are they designing with the means and methods of what the robots are capable of? In other words, like one of my Portcos Okibo that, of course I'm plugging them because I'm an investor. So big surprise. But
right.
they do automated drywall finishing and painting.
Hmm.
And if I ask them, like, hey, what percentage of projects are designed in a way that the robot can't paint and finish the entire space? They're like, well, there's always a percentage that, like, well, if you gave feedback to the designers and said, hey, like, move this wall out a little bit, move this in a little bit, so that it's optimized for the robot to do 100% of the project, wouldn't that be better? And they're like, actually, we have a tool where we can upload the drawings and we can decide what areas the robot can do and which areas they can't. I'm like, but are you giving it back to the designers to say redesign it? And they're like, no, we're not doing that. Like, we're not there yet. I'm like, okay, that's fair. So then I started taking from that. So if we have AI designing buildings so that robots can build them, if I'm a GC, if the risk is in managing resources, scalability, all these things that we got out of that post, which I suggest you talk to some of these people that posted, they said, look, it's a different skill set, it's a this and that. But if they can buy a robot, which GCs do have big balance sheets to manage the risk,
Right.
instead of subbing it out, can they just buy the drywall robot? Can they just buy the robot that can structurally frame a building? Can they buy a robot that lays the flooring? And if they can just buy the robot, then the scale of capacity goes away. The
Hmm.
risk of quality actually maybe goes away. The risk
Maybe.
of schedule maybe goes away. So what kind of ding 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 in my head was, if AI designs buildings so that robots can build them, is the GC going to start self-performing everything just because they're going to buy more robots?
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. And as you're talking about that, I also wonder, how many people understand. So my background, while KP's background is civil engineering, my background is architecture, and neither one of us does either of those anymore. But how many people realize, like, if you are an architect who's really thinking about the constructability of your building, and I can remember specific examples of this, like, hey, we can't do that because the framer can't actually get in there and swing a hammer,
Right.
or we can't actually fit a nailer in that space to get that nailed, fastened, something like that. And I mean, that's real world stuff, right? So what
Right.
you're talking about is a different version of that. Now, of course, before we hit record, one of my questions, sort of playing devil's advocate, was, okay, well, why don't we design the robots that are optimized to a certain size or something like that?
Mhm.
But we've got building material modules and things like that. But I think what you're saying is really intriguing. And one of the most common responses, I think, at least as I look at my screen here, and I don't know how the
Mhm.
comments are sorted here on my screen, but one of the most common comments was, well, it's a different business model. And I read that, and I was like, yeah, hey, I think that might have been the point of the question.
Yeah. But yeah. Yeah. But I think so here's part of what's like fascinating about all this, right? Um, I don't know the actual dimensions. Do you know the dimensions of a sheet of drywall?
Sheet of drywall, 8 by, oh
Eight by
man, I've
four or
forgotten already.
something.
4 by 8 sheet of drywall.
Right. So every architect designing should stick to that stand. Like the room
Mhm.
sizes are only in those increments for zero
Yeah.
waste, right? Which would be
For
ideal.
zero waste, yes.
But instead, it's like the hot dog issue. There's like 6 hot dogs, but 8 buns.
Yes. Same thing.
It's like that, right? Like we're going to design a building so that there's leftover drywall, so that there's leftover carpet. And it's interesting because as I was like, of course, people text me and people DM me about this stuff, right? And then they're like, well, what you're talking about is very complicated. And literally the next day or that day, Microsoft talks about quantum computing.
Mhm.
And with that, like their breakthroughs, the 17-year breakthrough that they've had on quantum computing. And the first thing is I do a deep dive on that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, so if you're saying like we have to rationalize what the owner wants in terms of a building and the ability to optimize the construction to get to a zero waste environment,
Mhm.
oh, that's too complicated. And I'm like, no, we have quantum computing coming.
Yeah.
It's not that complicated, right? Quantum
Yeah.
computing can run these
Yeah.
scenarios for us.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I think it's interesting, like this post, especially like we got more comments than we got reactions, which is always fun.
Mhm.
But I think we have to start thinking about this stuff. And you know, do architects ever design buildings and not think about the means and methods? Yes, all
Well,
the time.
yeah.
All the time.
Oh, one of the ironies I think of what you're talking about is, and again, for those that don't know, I do still teach some in both undergraduate and graduate. So I have an idea of what students are being taught. At some point when you're in school, you are taught about the modules of construction.
Mhm,
Like studs laid out at 16 inches on center wood framing, perhaps, or maybe 24, depending. And then, of course, the 4x8 sheet of drywall, et cetera, all your nominal dimensions, et
mhm,
cetera, et cetera. And you're taught to think in that way. And I think we talked about this on a past episode. When I did my internship about 120 years ago, there were three partners in this firm. Two of them were the architecture partners, and one was interior design partner. The two architecture partners, to me, of course, I was like 22 years old or something like
mhm.
that. To me, these dudes were old,
Yeah.
right? These are the old guys. But these guys had Mies van der Rohe as a professor when they were in school. They
Mhm.
were old. They
Yeah.
were really old. But what they brought to their practice, so they went to IIT in Chicago, and there's this infamous project that you do at IIT. They still do it. I saw somebody the other day on Instagram or something. A student had posted. They still do this project. I think they refer to it as the brick project, but they design some building, whatever the program is of the building, they design it, it's brick, and they have to figure out every tiny little module, including the mortar joints and everything else, and they have to document the whole thing.
Mhm,
And it's part of that is the process or the motion of understanding the modules.
mhm.
So the students should be learning this. Do they? Probably. Do they carry it into the profession? Maybe. Are buildings designed with that in mind? Maybe not.
Yeah. But,
But I think to get to
mhm.
what you're talking about, we have to, right? We have to, if you're going to reduce waste, you have to figure out how to reduce waste. And part of that is the modules that you construct with.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't know, like I started a robotics company. We were doing, it's called software automation. We were doing robots for the apparel industry. It was my first exposure to robotics. This is 13, 14 years ago now. And I learned about this whole process called DFM. And it was like design, it's a phase in manufacturing. It's called design for manufacturing.
Hmm.
And so we're building these prototype robots, um, like custom prototype robots, right? And then we go to a contract manufacturer that's going to manufacture hundreds of these, right, to scale us.
Right.
And we paid these guys. They came in, even though they're going to manufacture it, they come in, you pay them a ton of money, and their engineers say, look, this railing that you built for this robot to run on, it's 10 feet, it's 10 feet long. And that's a custom size.
Mm-hmm.
I can get you a 9-foot one for a third of the price.
Right.
So let's
We're going to
redesign
optimize.
it for the 9-foot rail. Oh, this
Yeah.
motor you're using, it's actually overkill for what you're doing. And I guess for your prototype, you wanted something overkill because you were unsure. So now we're going to scale it down, and that's going to save you 50% off
Right.
on the cost of that motor. And they went through piece by piece by piece and took this custom Frankenstein machine that we built that worked and said, here's all the SKUs that are available, the nuts, down to the nuts and bolts, right?
Yeah.
Because we're
Literally.
using some weird sized bolt that it turns out, if we had chosen a different one, it's like half off because
Mm-hmm.
it's a highly produced SKU, right? So
Right.
they go through and do all this stuff. And by the way, this is what Apple goes through when they deal with Foxconn to manufacture their phones. They go through this DFM process. And I found it absolutely fascinating because they took a robot that the custom one that we built cost us $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
They got it down to 50 grand.
Yeah.
And all the parts were readily available,
Yeah.
right? All the parts were like, hey, so if one of your robots breaks in the field, we can drop ship that replacement part because we keep them in inventory, not just
Yeah.
for you, but for the other 100 companies we support. We keep them in inventory and we're just drop ship them right to the site. And it was really fascinating. And I thought, we try to do that a little bit, but it's almost like too late, right? It's too late.
In construction, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, why not have like a conceptual drawing and, whatever BIM, whatever the hell, like BIM is dead. Look at that podcast. But, and you go to the owner and say, hey, here's conceptually what we want. And now I'm going to send it out for constructability. And it might mean that the walls move around a little bit. It might mean, it's optimizing for the availability of pieces and parts,
Yeah.
and for means and methods. And everything doesn't have to be custom.
Right.
Like it's custom, like, oh, we're getting this custom window because the fancy architect decided this is the window I want. Well,
Well,
there's
yeah.
one that's like 3 inches shorter that's like a tenth of the price. And that
Right.
green that you're so like enamored with, there's an off green of that's half price.
Yeah.
And if I'm the owner, I'm like, I don't care about the green is green, maybe. Like I'm not overly worried about it.
Yeah. One of the things I think that's really interesting about the example that you just used, that custom, the first robot, the prototype, right? When you're building that prototype, the point is not how much it costs, right? It's how do we build it so that it does what we want it to do, it gets the job done, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go through the process then of optimizing everything, cost and
Yeah.
operation and everything else. So we start thinking about this in terms of scale. Okay, we built one, we used that nut that was laying there on the or that bolt that was laying there on the workbench because it was laying right there and it fit in the hole or whatever it was. And now they figured out that we can use a different bolt just as effectively for half the price or something like that. So if we translate that to construction, if you're thinking about, if you're an owner that builds lots of buildings, and I worked for a firm years and years and years ago, and we did, it was a strange firm. We did everything. I worked on the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, and then we did distribution centers for like Albertsons and Safeway Foods and things like that. So tilt up concrete versus custom everything, right? In a Museum of Contemporary Art. But if you're the Albertsons or the whatever that build lots of buildings, this makes total sense. Oh yeah, we want you to optimize everything. how do our trucks get in and out? What are the bays like? Our sites, the land that we buy and we develop and all those things. And we might think like that. Like, how do I optimize this? Which makes
Mhm.
total sense. And what you're saying in terms of construction, we have to think about it in terms of a systems approach. And it's not just this one time that we're going to build, it's every time that we're going to build.
Mhm.
And maybe on the other end of the spectrum, a custom home or something like that. That's a very different animal, but still in the building materials world, there's no translation from tilt up concrete panel to wood stud, but in the building materials world, there's tons of overlap there where especially if you're a contractor too, it's like, how am I going to build these things? Why
Mhm.
am I not thinking about optimizing?
Mhm. Well, so think about this, right? We're talking about construction.
Hmm.
Now, track it over to operations,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Cleaning and maintaining and managing. It's so funny. I sold one of my houses a couple of months ago, and the one thing I just like hated about this house, I loved everything about the house. You're not supposed to change your air filters every 6 months.
Yeah.
I called the company out to come do it because the way the builder built it,
Oh, yeah.
it was like you had no room for error. You
Right.
had to sit there and like almost like kind of put a crowbar in there to pull out the tray to replace. And I'm like, and you're in the attic, and this was in Atlanta. So of course, when are you doing this in this summer? So it's 2000 degrees up in the attic, and I'm trying to like change this out and can't see and everything else. I'm like, this is insane, right? And so think about that. Every 6 months, I was getting tortured by this air conditioning system to the point I just told these guys, like, I will pay you $100. You just come do it for me,
Hmm.
right? And so think about how many times in a utility closet, in a boiler room, there's some handle that's just like awkwardly put there, and the main, there's all these intricacies about not just how do you build it, but how do you maintain it, and the lack
Yeah.
of clearance we give. You know, um, if you really wanted to optimize, they had like in a warehouse, they had those machines that automatically drive back and forth to clean the
Mhm.
concrete, right? That
Yep.
wash the concrete, a little suction thing. You see them in airports and stuff. Should it be optimized for two widths? So you're driving up once and back, and you're done.
Maybe.
Because if it
Yeah.
was two and a half, then all of a sudden I got to go like that's three, right? So you start thinking about even operating this thing, and I mean, if we have these Roombas in our houses, are we not going to have industrialized cleaning bots,
Right. Right.
right? I mean, I saw this great demo. This is 10 years ago of Caterpillar, a fully automated grading equipment grader.
Hmm.
They drop the grading plan in it and it runs.
Right.
But guess what? It can't grade everything because if the civil engineer didn't design it a certain way, there were like nooks and crannies it couldn't get into.
Right.
How important were those nooks and crannies?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I was going to say that came to mind as you're explaining that, but now yeah, I became a little conflicted there for a minute because you're talking about, hey, we're going to design this, or we're going to optimize it so the cleaning machine makes two passes, once up, once
Mhm.
down, and obviously, that there's an oversimplification in the example, right? There's
Mhm.
okay, well,
Oh, yeah.
we're going to design this for the cleaning, but what about the forklift that's stocking the upper things? And what about the exiting requirements
Mhm.
for fire code and all of those
Yeah.
things? But your other point about the quantum computing, which isn't necessary for this example, but all this stuff is figure outable,
Mhm.
right? It's not that hard to figure that out once we understand all the things that need to go in there, the
Mhm.
cleaning, the stocking, the exiting, the whatever the things are, then we can come to some number, um, and one of them is gonna be the control number.
Yeah. And by the way, if you solve for this and you can go back to the forklift company. Hey guys, make your forks a little bit wider. Like, I mean, if you start to build like what the pattern of if you take a systems driven approach, right? That this is all.
Yeah, it's all systems.
I
Yeah.
think I posted another post that said, "Hey, we're moving from means to methods to orchestration and agents." Right? This is
Mm,
like a massive symphony of sorts that we're trying to put together, right?
yeah.
And I think if you look at quantum, and I don't even know if you need quantum. I'm just really hyped about it because
Yeah.
Satya is hyped about it. I get hyped about anything Satya Nadella is hyped about. But you start thinking about all this stuff, right? And then you
Mhm.
go back to the building product manufacturers. And so that's like the second wave I'm building, right? So I've been talking to all the owners. I've been deliberately not been talking to AEC because I just don't think they're mission aligned to solve the bigger problem. They're too busy billing time and delivering change orders. They're just too much in it for me to pull them out of that mindset. So now I'm talking to building product manufacturers. And I ask a simple question. How often you get feedback on how to improve your product? And they're like hardly ever to none.
Mhm. Until there's a
Nobody
class
ever
action
comes to
lawsuit.
us and says, "Hey, you know that light fixture you designed? If you did it this way, it would be easier for me to install. If you did it that way, it would provide enough lighting that I could reduce the number of canned lights when I'm designing it." Right? So you start going down that way about every, of course, we all know like the number of SKUs in a building are wild, right? It's
Oh,
doors and
sure. Yeah.
hinges and doorknobs and HVAC. I mean, there's so many SKUs, right? And I think it's fascinating if you take this DFM approach, um, which Ethan, producer Ethan, you might want to put some notes in there about DFM since maybe our listeners don't know much about it. You can put something in the show notes about design for manufacturing. But if you take a DFM approach, there's a constant feedback loop to the conveyor system people, to the automated welding, to the CN. Like there's a constant feedback loop. And I feel like we have no feedback loop to the manufacturers. In fact, I was in a situation with an owner, a large grocery store chain, and every one of the stores was having a problem with a specific piece of equipment.
Mm.
And it was funny, they didn't even complain to corporate. They were selling the equipment on eBay and buying a different manufacturer that they liked better. And corporate didn't even know this was going on, but it was like this underlying thing. It's like, well, guys, why don't you let corporate know that this piece of equipment is not working for you? I don't know. I'm trying to run a store, man. I'm
Mhm.
trying to get stuff done. And one of the other stores, I was talking to him, and he had the same problem. I was like, well, how'd you solve it? He's like, this way. I was like, so there was no like feedback loop to corporate. I
Right.
was the feedback loop, which is wild, and also to the manufacturer to say, hey, we're this big grocery store chain. We've standardized on this SKU. We're getting some feedback from our store managers for X, Y, and Z. Have you guys heard? Like, are you doing anything about it? Zero feedback. And so I
Yeah.
think when we start thinking about that, the feedback loop that can be provided by the design community and the construction community and the operations people, the building product manufacturers, I feel like we could solve so many like optimization problems. Think about like, you're an HVAC company or Lennox or Otis, like Carrier, whoever. Hey, we designed in these 3 tonnages or these 4 tonnages. Well, then it turns out like I'm designing, and it's like, hey, it turns out I'm always having to
Mhm.
overbuy the tonnage for my cooling systems because
Right.
that's all that's available. Everything else is too undersized.
Right.
Well, maybe there's a middle size that, maybe I need an 8.5. I'm not an 8, I'm not a 9. I need an 8.5.
Yeah, that feedback loop is critical, and I completely agree with you. I mean, the number of times that I ran into this and on the design side where it's like, why is it this was always a frustration. It's like, why am I, again, with modularity in mind, right? And
Mhm.
trying to reduce waste and things like that. Why does the design of this particular elevation of this building or something like that, why is it being driven by the size of this one material. Doesn't make any sense at all, right? It doesn't have anything to do with any of these other things, except that that's the size that material comes in. That's just, really superfluous example. But I think your point of the feedback loop being constant, being continual, and through all the players, I think that's what's going to be required for this business model, if you will, this idea that you're talking about. Otherwise, it starts to fall apart pretty quickly.
No, and think about too, like back to the DFM example, when this contract manufacturer said, "Hey, I have all these parts standardized on
Mhm.
backlog, and I've got inventory. If you ever need a spare, like we can ship one as fast as FedEx can get it to you, we can get it to you."
Mhm.
Think about that in buildings, right? Things break. That's just the nature of
Yeah.
physics, right? Things break. Oh, it turns out we bought this product and spares aren't available because I mean, it's just like this thinking around the long-term viability and waste and all that around buildings. I think we can learn a lot from that DFM process.
Yeah.
And I think owners are open to it. I think when I talk to owners, they kind of get bullied by their design teams. It's a very strange dynamic. I'm paying you and I'm asking for X, and you're like, well, X won't work. Sorry. Like,
Yeah.
but I'm the customer, right? Like this, like the customer is right doesn't seem to apply.
The customer's right. What? Well, yeah. I mean, there is an expertise that they're paying for. However, what is that expertise? Is it on DFM? No, it's not likely on DFM. But I think, as we look at the future, and again, I think, there are nuances available here, certainly. But if we if we're going to talk about resilience, right,
Mhm.
we've been talking about this behind the scenes. We're getting ready to host a sustainability, what do we call it? Sustainability forum, um, on the way to launching a new mastermind group, which is really going to be focused on resilience.
Mhm.
These are the types of things we're going to have to think about. How do we actually? What's the actual life cycle cost? What's the process of designing, building, and operating?
Mhm.
Because it is, I think there is a missing link there often between
Mhm.
the design and build and operating communities, if you will.
Yeah. No, look, I think there's just so much, and I think that's why,
Hmm.
like, we're all getting together next week in Phoenix. I'm really looking forward to like, you know, starting to talk about these topics.
Hmm.
You know, I think argue about these topics.
Maybe.
What's I have this thing that I really believe that like someone says, well, it's the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
My inner 5-year-old comes out, but why?
Hmm.
But why? you know, and to the point of frustration, right? Someone might throw something at me at that point, but I think these are the conversations we have to have. I mean, it's just this whole
There.
idea of like people jumping on a stage and talking about whatever bullshit they want to talk about is just not that's not collaborative, right? That's
Right.
just like spewing stuff. So I think if we're all committed to doing better, which is where it starts, right? Commitment and
Right.
passion is where it starts. We're like the smartest industry in the world.
Well, and that's where, you used the term, or you evoked the term a minute ago, which I continue to contend is the most dangerous term we have in our society, because this is the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
We are supposed to be the ultimate problem solvers.
Hmm.
This is the way we've always done it. Doesn't enter into that realm,
Yeah.
but yet we evoke that term all the time. or
Yeah.
that we use that product, or we make it that size, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Imagine if you
Sure.
went to your doctor and you said, "Hey, I have a fever," and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna throw some leeches on you."
This is why we've always
Well,
done
we've
it.
always done it.
I'm out.
Oh, you have a headache? You want me to go get the drill? I'm gonna drill into your skull.
Because this is the way we've always
The way
done it.
we've
Yeah.
always done it.
Yeah. Be careful when you say that.
Mhm.
Careful what you ask for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is, I do. This is obviously it's a fascinating topic. It has generated a lot of reaction on LinkedIn, and again, it's one of the shortest posts that
Mhm.
you've had probably ever. I mean, it's only 3 sentences long, so it's got to be right up there. But I think it really strikes at the heart of the evolution that we're seeing in the built environment, the AEC world, and the way that we design and we build, and the materials that go into it, the way that we develop them and own and operate in the built environment. So let me, as we get ready here to wrap it up, let me read this post one more time. And then again, if you're not following KP on LinkedIn, you should be. Just look for KP, the letters K and P, and then Reddy, Reddy. You can follow him. You probably won't be able to connect with him because he's usually capped out at LinkedIn's maximum number there. But follow KP for more posts about what's happening in the built environment, and you'll find gems like this. It says, I hear lots of answers to this question, and I have my own ideas. Why do so few GCs self-perform anything? If your answer is risk, please be specific. So go find that post when you listen to this at some point in the future, at least from when we're recording. Go find this post and type your answer into the comments, and let's see. Join the conversation. Join dozens of other people that are reacting and commenting on this particular post. This is really interesting. I'm sure we'll revisit some version of this conversation again before too long, because, like I said, I think it's one that's going to be on our radar a lot in the near future.
Yeah, and I think, Jeff, this is the reason why we're the number one podcast in the built environment, because
It
we talk about
certainly
these
is.
issues. We talk about the real.
The real, not because this is the way we've always done it.
No. Number one again.
Still. All right. I am joined today, as usual, by KP Reddy. He's the CEO and founder of KP Reddy Co. and also the founder of Shadow Ventures. As KP said, I guess by the time you hear this, I didn't think about this as I said it, but producer Ethan is not going to have this one published before we head to Phoenix for our next one-day mastermind event. But we will be in Atlanta in Q2 for our one-day mastermind event in May. So keep an eye out for info on that. I know tickets are already going for that event, and we have other offerings out there, obviously.
I will tell you, the May event is going to blow up. There's a lot of stuff we're working on. I think that, I think it's going to be I think May is going to be one of those ones where we actually have to tell people, like, hey, we don't have room.
Right.
Which is usually just a marketing ploy by the events team. But this time it might actually be, because I think there were so many people that couldn't make it to Phoenix and are automatically signing up for Atlanta.
Right.
And of course, I've spent so much of my life in Atlanta. There's also like a good following there as well. So,
right. Producer Ethan will have a link in the show notes for the ticket link for the event in Atlanta. And let me, as we're talking here, I'll just tell you what the date's going to be. It's May 20th. Tuesday, May 20th in Atlanta. It'll be an all-day. It's our one-day mastermind event, our Q2 one-day mastermind event coming up in Atlanta, May 20th, 2025. So looking at show notes for registration link for that event. KP, as always, thanks for joining me today. And for all of you that are out there listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. Again, follow KP on LinkedIn. Go over and find this post. I hear lots of answers to this question. I have my own ideas. Why do so few GCs self-perform anything? Go find that post. Put in the comments why you don't self-perform anything, or why you think GCs don't, or why you think they should. Be interesting to get your take on that.
And if you have a really good answer, Ethan or Jeff might pick it and have you on a podcast to, what do we call it, the Troll KP Unpacked for edition, where you get other people to come in and talk about my posts. So
you weren't supposed to know
you might
that.
be one of the special ones that get picked.
That's right. We're starting a Troll KP club. You can join. There'll be a link in the show notes. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back again next week with another episode of KP Unpacked. Thanks, KP.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.